Well, I think we'll just get underway. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sandy Johnston, and I am a senior transportation planner with the Central Transportation Planning staff, the staff to the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. And one of the hats that I wear is that I manage the transit working group that is sponsoring this coffee chat. So I'm going to put a quick link to the transit working group in the chat for those who may want to read more. And if we could go to the next slide, please, Stella. So I'm just going to read through the guidelines real quickly, and then we'll get down to business a little bit. All participants will be joining the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself in Zoom to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. If you want to participate in the discussion, which of course we highly encourage, please select the raise hand function. Finding this depends on your version of Zoom. You may find it by clicking either in the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or it'll be in the reactions button in the toolbar. Since we have such a large crowd today, we will then be calling on participants. Sometimes we allow folks to just talk out loud in these meetings if we have a small crowd, but today there's enough folks that we're going to be calling on you, so please do raise your hand. If you are on the phone, you can use the buttons *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Stella Jordan in the chat box or at sjordan@ctps.org or 857-702-3675. Next slide, please, Stella. All right, so this meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully, please contact Stella at sjordan, SJORDAN, @ctps.org or 857-702-3675. Next slide, please. All right, and so again, because we have such a large crowd, we often do these introductions out loud, but I'm going to encourage you to introduce yourselves, please, in the chat rather than out loud today. So again, my name is Sandy Johnston, he, him, his pronouns, and I am a senior transportation planner at CTPS, and I manage the transit working group. So you can add all of those details should you desire in the chat, please. And with that, I think we'll hand it over to our guest, Victoria Ireton, who's deputy, let me see if I get this right, Deputy Director of Community Engagement at the MBTA. I'm very excited to welcome her here to talk a little bit about the kind of practice and philosophy of public engagement that she and her team are working on. And I think you will all be very excited to hear from her. I think we're going to have she's going to talk a little bit, and then we'll have hopefully a really good conversation. So with no further ado, go ahead, Victoria.
Thank you, Sandy. And I appreciate the MPO having me here today for the coffee chat. And it's so nice to meet all of you that are on the call. Would love to kick it off with just kind of telling you who I am. So I'm a new face at the MBTA. I started February 28th. It feels like it's been so much longer at this point. But assumed the role that many of you may know my predecessor, Anthony Thomas. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Engagement. And so a little bit about myself and how I got here. The reason I was really attracted to this position is actually a really personal component. So I was a homeless teenager, and the MBTA was my lifeline. It was my access to freedom, to get to places. And I know what it's like to not have necessarily the time to attend a public meeting, because you have to go out and make money, and there's other essential competing priorities. And so my approach to engagement is really hopefully meeting riders where they are. And so that's kind of a big part of what we've been changing about our approach. And then on the professional side, previously I was a lobbyist in the cannabis space. And then prior to that, I was a campaigner for Congressman Moulton. So I've been kind of in and out of government for the past couple of years. But with that, would love to kind of talk about our department and some of the changes that we've been making. So if you could advance to the next slide. Perfect timing. That was impressive. So the purpose of our team, and just so you all know, our team was created relatively new. It was like right before the pandemic struck, is that we're really hoping that we build a relationship with the community. So It doesn't mean we're just showing up about one project, but that it's a constant feedback loop and we're showing up just to have a conversation. And that we're also utilizing that feedback to better inform our decisions at the MBTA, our planning, our design, our policy. And so we do that through a variety of mechanisms. But one of my big goals has been shifting from the project-based outreach to the relationship-based outreach in an orderly way, and doing so by increasing language access and the mechanisms in which we engage with our riders. Next slide, please. So some of the changes that we've been making, and these again are just the slides that we utilize for our board presentation now. But one of the big things was getting the information that we share into the neighborhood newsletters through the Office of Neighborhood Services for the City of Boston. Small, but it reaches a larger audience. So trying to maximize that reach. One of the big things that was near and dear to me, my mother personally hates email. So how can we reach riders that want to leave us voice messages? So now we have a dedicated phone line that folks can leave a voice message. So, making sure that we can reach everybody. Another piece of feedback that I kept hearing was housing authorities and health centers would love to share information, but they needed the information in a flyer. So creating flyers for our system-wide public meetings so they can better share that, and going one step further of translating those into other languages as needed to make sure that we're making sure that information is accessible. Another thing that I reacted to is folks were like, how do I work at the MBTA? So sharing information from our human resources department with the community organizations that we work with so that they know about opportunities and they feel engaged and that they know the steps forward. And then a big thing that's really important, again, part of this like relationship based outreach is creating our own outreach meetings. So not showing up for a project, but just like a tea talk. And so inviting different communities, and we're slowly but surely kind of grouping different communities together and inviting those folks to join. So our hope is that our Quincy meeting for that geographic region will kick off in July and will be one of our first ones. And that meeting actually will be bilingual, so that it'll be in English and in Chinese. Next slide, please. And then in April, so one of the big things that also was kind of a big feat is that our standard Zoom slides that we introduce for our standard Zoom slides that we use for public meetings are now translated into Spanish, Chinese, and English so that they're actually in written form so that folks can join and not have to worry about not being able to read the slides for at least joining the meeting. And then we have Spanish, Chinese, and interpreters for the meetings, as well as we have American Sign Language and closed captioning for all of our system-wide meetings. And then just a basic thing. So folks never know the resources that exist at the MBTA. It's something as simple as contacting customer support or signing up for service alerts. So we sent out a resource email so that folks could know how to find that and where to go. And then some other high level things, just meetings, bus network redesign, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. We're doing a lot of outreach around that. Things like going to Mayor Wu's coffee hours, meeting with Mass Senior Action Council, and community centers, civic associations. And then one of the big things that I think structurally we're changing is I come from like a service background. And so days of service, I think it's important to show up to the community just to provide something for them. So we actually this month had our first day of service in the city of Lynn, where we cleaned up a community garden that grows produce for folks that are dealing with housing insecurity. And it's sold at a farmer's market that is EBT eligible. So we're looking to do more of those in the coming months, but those are just some of the examples. Next slide, please. And then these are our resources. So our team can be reached at public engagement at MBTA, the voice message that I had mentioned. And then we try to make the differentiation. Customer support is more the immediate feedback. If your bus is late, you want to contact them still because they have a direct line with our control center. But that is my short presentation. Would love to kick it off with some questions if there are some.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. I think it's going to be a great conversation. I know that when I talk to my peers in the planning world, or just follow the discussions, this approach of relationship building and emphasis of that over kind of very specific project-based outreach is really considered a strong best practice. So I'm very excited to hear that you're working that way and to hear what other folks have to think. So I have some discussion questions that I'm just going to read through really quickly. Some of these were things I came up with. Some are things that some of you all submitted when you registered. I apologize. I put this slideshow together on Friday, and I know that a lot of people have registered since then, so I may not have captured all of your questions. I do know that, and there will be other opportunities, but I do just want to kind of put these out there as basic contours for the discussion. So how can we, all of us here in this room, act as force multipliers, so to speak, for each other in engagement and outreach? How do you, any of you, practice ongoing engagement and relationship building? What strategies have you found helpful or less so? How do you measure engagement outcomes? And how can engagement prove its value to agency or municipal management, elected officials, planners, and to the public? So again, just to go back to the guidelines real quickly, I want to invite folks to raise your hands and we will call on you. Or you can put your questions in the chat. And I see already we have a question from Judy, which also relates to discussion question number 3, which is how do you know community engagement is working? And our question was how do you measure engagement outcomes? So I think it's very, very closely related questions. Victoria, do you want to talk a little bit about your team's approach to that?
Yeah, 100%. So very big fan of data, and I think it's important. I think one of the challenges that we all face is that you can't force folks to kind of disclose information, right? That's a hindrance for their participation. So one of the things that we're evaluating is incorporating an exit poll in our public meetings to see like how folks heard about it, or and if they would like to disclose demographic information. But I think one of the most recent things that we've seen that's kind of proof, and it's not necessarily the most tangible thing, but I'm a big believer that if you build it, they will come. And so by incorporating the Spanish and Chinese interpreter in our system-wide meetings, the other week we actually had 4 participants in a breakout room that was Spanish only, which was kind of one of the first instances that we've had this for a public meeting, which was, I don't want to say necessarily proof, right? But it was 4 individuals that we normally wouldn't engage with. And we were able to host an entire breakout session in their native language. So I think it's proof that engagement is working, but I understand like the need to collect data, and we're hopefully going to work more towards that in the future.
Thank you. All right, a couple more questions in the chat. So Adi wants to know how many staff do you have at the team to directly support these efforts? Do you have a dedicated community engagement team, or are you able to pull in other staff from across the agency?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mix. So right now, my team is still small, where the department itself is still in its infancy. So it's me and 3 liaisons as it stands. For the project-specific outreach, the MBTA still has outreach consultants that support on those efforts. And then also, for instance, projects like bus network redesign have ample staff from the MBTA that are supporting that. But I think it varies based off of kind of the situation. But as far as just like attending community events, it's mainly me and the 3 liaisons. And the hope is to hopefully build out that program so that we have a bigger staff in the future.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so Lisa wants to know, how do you measure the role of community engagement when it comes to increase and decrease ridership, both short-term and long-term? That's I think a very complex question. And I know we said we're talking more about relationship building in the long-term than about project-based things. But one of the things that I'm interested in is that there's kind of an assumption in the planning world that better engagement, better outreach will lead to projects that go more smoothly. And to less conflict with the community. And I think that kind of inherently makes sense, but I don't think I've ever seen it written up and researched in a way that is really compelling to me. So do you know anything about how people are making these connections, how your team is trying to make these connections to establish causation and know that what we're doing is really working?
Yeah, that's a big one that I don't know if I necessarily have a great answer for. I will say, as far as like community engagement, when it comes to ridership, um, I think utilizing multiple mechanisms, right? So if there's decreased ridership and those folks are now at home and they're not utilizing our service, how do we reach them? And the hopes is that our force multipliers, right? That they are on an email list for somebody else if they're not on ours, to reach those folks. But then the individuals that are still utilizing our service, that we're reaching them by doing street teams or a station open house, and finding them on their routes home so that they don't have to attend a meeting. But then in the kind of bigger picture, coming from the relationship building world, I think sometimes you can do everything right. And I don't think it's necessarily going to make the project go smoother. I think that like some projects inherently are just never going to fit the needs of the community, but there's always compromise, right? And I think that that's the role of engagement, is listening to the feedback and concerns. Like building code is building code. Some projects cannot be changed, and that's not, an agency's lack of will to do so. It's more of there's just constraints, right? But I think humanizing that, right, and explaining that and bringing that transparency of being like, we would love to, and we hear your concerns. However, it is not within our, it's not within reasonable for us to do so. So I think that it's important to highlight that.
Thank you. And I really do appreciate that comment. I think it's something that, I've run into in speaking with folks, is that sometimes the barriers that we face institutionally are not obvious to folks, and the need to translate them is quite substantial. Uh, all right, so let's go to Susan with your hand up, and then we'll get to Matthew's question in the chat.
Hi there. First off, I want to thank you, because I think you must be doing a really great job, because the amount of communications we have had and the quality of them in the past couple of years, I think have really increased. So thank you so much. I've had communications with at least a couple of your liaisons, which has been wonderful. I was wondering, so I'm in the outer core in Lexington, and I'm wondering what you see as like, how can we build kind of stronger partnerships and really get information out to people in our area? You mentioned you're trying to get things in neighborhood papers in Boston. Would you consider such a thing in the outer core? We want to be good partners, and we want people to use the services we have, even though we don't have many of them. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, so one of the items, especially coming from the cannabis space, where town clerks are really the mechanism to, I don't want to say you reach everybody, but it is another way to reach the residents. And so we now have an entire listserv of all the town and city clerks in our service area that we send our system-wide meetings, our kind of public updates to. As far as putting them in newspapers, we're still exploring that. There's kind of a big price tag associated with those advertisements for every single one. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily like off the table per se. But in the meantime, right, with no budget, you can send an email to a town or city clerk. They can post it on their page if they choose to do so, or at least post it, a paper version in their office. And I think that it's slowly growing that. And then my ultimate goal is to really get to a place that I can go meet with various groups, right? That we could do an outreach meeting in the outer core. We've already been, kind of gaining traction, and it's only been 3 months. So the hope is to really grow that, because most of my outreach background when I was working for the congressman is on the North Shore. So ranging all the way from Lynn up to Newburyport, out to North Andover, down to Billerica, Burlington area. And so would love to kind of go reutilize those relationships to then invite them into the conversation.
I think we might have to borrow your list of town clerks for our own purposes there.
Be happy to.
So going back to the chat, we have a couple of questions here. Matthew wants to know, what barriers do you face to expanding the breadth or depth of your engagement Do you need more staff, more relationships, more funds, etc.?
I think one of the barriers, and this will probably not be a surprise to many in this room, is time. So everyone meets mainly at night, and there's only so many, like you can double book meetings, right? But the most meetings that you can hit for an outreach event in the evening is going to be 2 that you're hopping from one Zoom to the next. So often, sometimes when a group is asking me to come meet with them, I have to say, I'm so sorry, like I'm already booked that evening and it's a month out. Are you free the following month? So I think that's one of the biggest barriers. And again, obviously having more staff can help like multiply that, but also you want to make sure that you're not growing too fast and not making sure that there's follow-up and there's consistency there. So I think it's a healthy balance, but I would say that's probably one of the biggest barriers.
I definitely feel that one. And then Colette from Wellesley wants to know, are you planning or is it valuable to integrate generalized community engagement with project-specific outreach? For example, if we're planning a project-specific meeting in her municipality, should we try to plan for a quick section on the generalized outreach and feedback, or is it better to keep the 2 separate?
I think it depends on the circumstances, right? So I think I look at things like the project right now. There's a bridge project that's happening in our capital delivery. It's so specific to the neighborhood that my involvement in that, I'm not going to be able to speak to bridge schematics. I'm just going to help and assist to disseminate the information. So I think that's like a healthy mix. But then, you know, projects that kind of go beyond the barriers of a project, right? That have other implications. For instance, the Blue Hill Ave bus lane right next to the Mattapan line station. Those 2 literally are up against each other. So I think it's important to kind of not only do the project-based outreach, but ensure that those 2 projects are coordinating and that we're acting as kind of that gap filler so that the community knows that there is coordination between the 2. So I think it is kind of dependent. I don't know if that was a great answer then.
No, I mean, that makes sense to me. All right, Lisa.
Hey everyone, and thank you so much for coming to this coffee chat. I think this is more of a conversation starter than a specific question. I am thrilled that the T is doing more community engagement. It's more than I've ever seen. Willingness to listen to the public. I do a ton of community engagement at my own job, and what I have learned, for better or worse, is what people think is true is just as important as whether or not it's actually true. And that's tough in the world that we live in the transportation community, which is data-driven decisions, analyses. And I've lost count of the amount of times I've seen conflict between people who are some of the smartest people I've ever met saying, this is true. And the people they're talking to saying, that's entirely possible, but that's not speaking to me, that you're still not meeting my need by telling me that your thing that you're doing is accurate. So and that's why I brought up the ridership before. If it's an actual goal of the MBTA to just get more people to use it, even if it's not the exact same people all the time, we're very transient. People move in and out of Boston all the time. We have colleges, healthcare. If the goal is at any given moment to get a greater percentage of humans to be using the T, then how do we turn this increased approach of community engagement as a means to help really reach people where they're at, like you were saying, given that perception is reality? And just a tiny quick example, it happened, my where I work had a event, and there was something that was said that I'm like, I can prove in data that that's false. Like I can physically demonstrate to you that that's not an accurate thing. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that this person thought it was true. How do I reach that person and say, your opinion matters? We want you to, we want you to use this particular thing. And what can I do to help you feel better that it's really gonna match? So hopefully that ramble made sense, at least what I'm trying to get at. But mostly I'm just thrilled that the T is having these conversations. There was a while where I didn't see them, and now I'm seeing them, and I think that's great.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. And I just want to make sure that I'm like accurately capturing what you're saying. So you're saying that somebody has a feeling that may necessarily not be supported by data, and how do you kind of navigate that situation, correct?
I think a better way to say it is, how do you deal with data that somebody thinks is the most important data if the T says, no, this other data is more important? I guess like an example would be if there's one time that the commuter rail is just making it up an hour and a half late. And let's say there's this tiny little percentage that's going to happen again. Person X may not care, because if they're late to work an hour and a half once, that could be disastrous for them. So it's like you can point to these tiny little percentages, but it's still not going to get the person on the commuter rail. So how do you match all of those things? Because probably somewhere everybody is right at least a little bit. But if the goal is, how do you get more people to use the system, then how do you address the perception as reality aspect?
That is a tough one. And I don't know if I can necessarily best answer that one, because a lot of it is about the reliability of service, right? And especially with all of the construction planned for the MBTA this summer, that's going to be a hard narrative, right? That's why we're really trying to make sure that the community engagement team is out there expressing that this is going to be, it's a future investment, right? And that's not a great topic to discuss with the community, because they're like, no, I want better service now, right? And that's totally fair and understandable. But I think one of the ways that I kind of deal with those conversations is humanizing it, right? So like often when I'm in a meeting, and especially talking about buses so much recently, I acknowledge my personal experience, that I recognize that, when the bus doesn't show up and you're waiting another 30 minutes, that's 30 minutes of your time that you really needed, right? And how do we empathize with that, and acknowledging, saying like, I have been there, I understand when the bus doesn't lower down and you have a cart full of groceries, that's really challenging. And I've personally experienced that, and I hear you. And then I usually lead into, and here are the solutions that we are working on around this. It doesn't mean that and I think even being as honest, saying it doesn't mean that I'm going to fix it tomorrow, and it doesn't mean that this is going to be better in perpetuity, but I want you to know that I'm here, I'm listening, and I want to work on this with you, and I want you to know that I'm vested in it. Just like reliability of service. And I think that's why when you start to build trust with the community, or kind of the leaders, right, that can help disseminate that information, you slowly but surely change the narrative. It doesn't have, if 3 people have a good experience on our service, they're going to tell 3 others. That multiplier effect can really change. And I saw that, it's especially coming from the campaign world, you have kind of your volunteer captains that are in charge of then recruiting their own people, and then those people are recruiting others. And I think that's how you can slowly change the narrative, so that folks will be interested in using it. If someone hears like, oh, I was, if someone says I was sitting in 2 hours of traffic, oh, I took the T and like I got to work in 30 minutes. That's amazing. And that can actually have more of an impact than, me presenting to 15 organizations, right? Because that could be posted in a Facebook group that has 30 individuals in one service area. So I don't know if I've exactly answered your question though, and I'm sorry, but I hope it was close enough.
Sounds like an interesting ongoing dialogue. I think you two would have a lot to talk about if you have a chance to connect at some point. So I want to go on to Judy's question in the chat. She wants to kind of bring your attention to that HHS administration has a national center on inclusive planning, and a question about how do you engage people with disabilities and older adults in really meaningful ways in transportation planning. She also included a link if anybody wants to click on that and explore in the chat.
Well, first, I did not know about that resource, so thank you for sharing, because I am always looking for new and better ways to identify folks. So some of the ways that we have engaged with folks with disabilities or seniors is we actually have a system-wide accessibility office at the MBTA that's super helpful, and our partners, and I believe my colleague Jennifer Ross is actually on the call today. Yes, she is. She's still here. And so Jennifer is a great partner in helping reach some of those folks. But then in addition, we also will do meetings with Mass Senior Action Council. I recently went to a what is it called? Not a I went to a senior center, but I've also gone to a like community center to meet with their senior group. So showing up in person and meeting with folks and gaining feedback. And then, always finding different ways. So we email disability commissions, but trying to see like, is there a way that we can set up a meeting to talk with the folks that they regularly engage with? But yeah, I haven't necessarily formalized the approach, but always trying to meet with more groups so that they know that we exist.
Yeah, and I know I have a meeting with Jennifer tomorrow to talk over outreach for and our research for a project that I'm also working on, contracted for the MBTA. So the universe is falling in on itself a little bit here. Colette wants to know if we have suggestions for best venues for outreach in our own communities with local knowledge. Should we shoot that an email to public engagement at mbta.com? I'm thinking particularly of towns' public information officers, most widely read online news resource, popular Facebook groups, etc. And Colette, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that we at CTPS would love to see that information as well. And I know my colleagues Sean Rourke and Stella and Megan are here, our outreach and comms team, but I'm thinking that would be very helpful for us as well.
Yes, that would be amazing, especially with the goal to hopefully move to hybrid meetings in the near future. Any resources you have, please send them along.
All right. More questions, folks? So anybody, I'm intrigued that the second question I have here under discussion questions. Anybody have experiences that you want to share about on practicing ongoing engagement and relationship building, and what has worked for you or less so? Especially specifically if you have it around transit or around planning. I'd definitely be interested in hearing about that. Colette, yeah.
Hi. So I've been working on outreach on in our town for a local microtransit service that our RTA has been piloting for a year. And I've been going to a lot of PTO meetings and council on aging meetings, and I'm finding there's just not a lot of people that are coming to these meetings. I think people are just so busy that I go to these meetings and there's 15 people, and it's generally the board of the organization I'm talking to and no one else. And so I've started to just stop people on the street. Every time I see someone who looks like a student in my area carrying groceries, I stop them and ask them if they know about the service, and they generally don't. And so now I'm asking for business cards from the RTA so I can hand out to people, because it's a little bit more formalized. But I'm finding that it's just really retail, one-on-one grassroots engagement that's what's working here, and it's obviously painful, and it's on the ground and it's local, and I live in the heart of town and I walk everywhere, so I bump into a lot of people and I have lots of these conversations. And because of COVID and people being off public transportation, they're really disengaged and they don't really know what's happened in this space. And we've written letters to our local news blog. We're doing everything we can, but it's just really uphill work all the time. And I actually, the comment that I just sent in about sharing our public information officer and things like that, that was a conversation that we had at the MBTA advisory board also. So I will, our next meeting, definitely suggest to all of the towns included in that group that we should be sharing this information, with you, Victoria, because, I think we need all the help we can get in and outreach. I'm really hoping, we're hoping to have a meeting in the fall about the third line expansion in the Framingham Worcester line, which is a hot topic. So hopefully we'll get a lot of people there, which is why I think maybe a small section on general outreach at the end will be helpful, because people sometimes will come to these meetings, but they're not really interested in the third line. They're sort of interested in something ancillary that's also public transport related. So we need to have a place that we can capture those comments, even though they're not strictly project related, but they're definitely MBTA related. So I don't know, that's kind of very discombobulated, but I mean, it just seems to be right now, grassroots, almost walking around, talking to people. I'm putting up sandwich boards all over town, moving them around with QR codes. It's hard work and it's slow work. So that's what I have to share.
Thank you for sharing, Colette. Yeah, it is definitely a lot of work to get the word out, and evening meetings are a real challenge, right? As are daytime meetings. As you know, the MPO meetings are at 10 a.m. on every other Thursday, which is not ideal for normal folks to make it also. So meetings in general, very difficult. So we have a question in the chat from Christine, who wants to know, how do you interact with the various transformation offices at the MBTA for the various modes? And what are your thoughts on LinkedIn and other social media? Do you feel like writers are engaged? That's kind of a big topic.
Well, first and foremost, I do interact with the transformation team. So they share their public meetings with us to disseminate to our list. And they are very active on LinkedIn. All of our public meetings are posted on our social, specifically through Twitter. And we all kind of have like this shared resource that we let each other know, so that our social team can push out our meetings, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, to share. I think LinkedIn is great, and I think that they do it really well. And I think where transformation is a different type of project, right? That there's kind of impacts long term and it's a little bit slower. I think it's a better platform. I think a lot of times for the outreach that we're looking to do, I don't know if LinkedIn is the best platform to reach folks. In my experience personally with engagement, I found that Facebook does a really great job of engaging with the populations that are, right under 30 and then into, the later years. And then another great platform that I think is great to reach younger folks is TikTok. This is a shameless plug, the MBTA TikTok, I have to say the videos are really great. But I think it's actually the new platform that you can share information in a digestible format to reach people. But I do think that writers are engaged on our Facebook page and especially on our Twitter. We get a lot of feedback via Twitter. So yeah.
I think we can all agree that Boston Transit Twitter is very, very vocal. Maria, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this conversation. I just wanted to go back to what Colette was talking about and your question number 2. I think what I've actually found to be super successful is because I'm just really trying to disseminate information about our transportation programs, and is to actually glom on to other meetings or events that are happening that have maybe nothing to do with transportation. So we distribute farmers market coupons to low to moderate income older adults in Brookline, and so which are very popular. And so going to events like that has been really successful in sort of just trying to disseminate information about our programs that are available. And I just want to echo that I really appreciate the outreach that the T has undertaken over the last couple of years. We have used those flyers in our senior center to give people information about like line closures and that kind of thing. So thank you.
Farmers markets are great. I know in the past we've done some piggybacking on that as well. So. Lisa?
I tried to write this in the chat and couldn't figure out how to phrase it, so I'm going to try to ask it out loud. Could you talk some more about ways that the T is taking advantage of external events to promote the T as a good option? And I'll give you the example I was thinking of. I know you mentioned, a random person might be stuck in traffic and say, I was there for 2 hours. They tell their friends, hey, I'm took the tea. It only took 30 minutes. So that it worked on me yesterday. I was at a concert in East Boston. It happened to be right near the airport stop. Knew I was going to take the tea there. Curious how I was going to get home. A Lyft was $114. And it was not worth my $114 to take a Lyft from Boston to Boston. I ended up taking the tea back home because it took a lot longer, but now I have $114 that I might not have had. So, and I think some of that had to do with, I think there's some events going on, there's some construction going on. So really taking advantage of the messaging of, hey, all this stuff is going on above ground, but you can still take the tea and get everywhere you're going and just skip all that. And the goofy example I was thinking of, maybe it'll illustrate, remember when at the Super Bowl, like the lights went out or something happened, and within seconds, Oreo had like a ad up saying you can still dunk in the dark. And they were like, it was like a picture of Oreo cookies and you're dunking it in, like the marketing was just right there. Like they were on it. So is there plans just in general, or people thinking about how do you take advantage, not just, oh, hey, skip traffic, but like, here's, X thing going on. And this is a really good option because now you don't have to deal with all the headaches that go along with X, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great question. And I'm not as heavily involved in this planning because this happened before I joined the MBTA, so I wasn't involved. But for the US Open, I know that there was a big push for folks to take the MBTA and utilize that service instead. And that was a big partnership and coordinating with the agency. And so I think that's a really great example of like pushing folks because there's not that much parking in that area. And so it is a better option. But I think that would be the best example that I have. And I am noticing that my colleague may have a better answer or she may have a question. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Jennifer
please go
Brown.
ahead, Jennifer.
Well, thank you. I actually didn't have an answer, but I had a shameless plug for a question a little bit earlier. So our department, System-Wide Accessibility, puts out a monthly newsletter, and we've been trying to amplify different agencies. So we do an organization spotlight every other month. So if somebody wants us to spotlight their organization, we're focused on older adults and people with disabilities. We'd also be happy to put out your, meeting notices within the newsletter. And one sort of event that we're going to take advantage of, Victoria doesn't know this yet, but I'm planning on, I just gathered all of the disability services for local colleges. So we're going to be reaching out because it's going to be, before we know it, it's going to be back to school time. And I wanted to coordinate efforts with the ride, with our department, with the Charlie Card store and our new coordinated mobility center to let students with and without disabilities to know what options, they have around for them. And we can also take it to the streets and hit the stations. What do you think, Victoria? I think you game?
Sounds good to me.
She's all in. But yeah, Lisa, you're always so awesome with all these great ideas, and with Victoria on board and myself and some new folks at the ride, I think we can really do a lot of collaboration and a little getting out there. The Mayor's Commission, also ADA Day is going to be July 26th, and they'll be back live at City Hall Plaza. So the MBTA will have a cooling bus there. We'll probably have a table, and you're also coming out to that too, Victoria.
I'll be there.
Thank you. I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to give me any information to promote your organization.
Thank you, Jennifer. I love seeing these plans being hatched live. I did want to follow up on one thing Lisa said, actually, and I will admit that I didn't fully understand all of the references that you made, but I think you raised an interesting question, Lisa, which is there are opportunities for engagement in crisis and in disruption. And I wonder, Victoria or Jennifer, anybody else who wants to talk about this, what opportunities do you see to kind of use nimble and flexible response in the middle of a crisis to further your messaging, to engage with folks and not necessarily to play defense, but to really try and bring people on board and into your systems of being able to talk and to build those relationships. Because the way I see it is like, it's very easy to get caught up in like, oh no, my train's late again. This MBTA sucks, right? But it is also an opportunity for people to feel cared for if somebody reaches out with a human face.
I suppose one hot button topic that we're working on is safety at the MBTA. And everybody knows that we've had, some issues, and just perhaps talking about it and getting it out there and letting the folks know what we're doing to make sure that they're safe on the MBTA. I think that would be a good way to, make sure they feel cared for.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, and a complicated one, right? Because there's so many different axes to safety, and what makes one person feel safe can be different from or even conflictual with what makes another person feel safe.
Yeah, these issues raise opportunities for us for improvement. So one of my core duties is customer complaints as they relate to accessibilities, and instead of complaints, I call them opportunities for improvement. So
yeah. See, Franny's hand is up, and as usual, Franny's outside.
walking the dog. First of all, Jennifer, what is your role at MBTA?
Sure. I'm the Customer Engagement Coordinator at the Department of System-Wide Accessibility. So we're charged with ensuring that the MBTA is accessible for older adults and people with disabilities.
Okay, great. So I'm from Acton, and I'm on my Commission on Disabilities and the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee. And I'm also on the LRTA board, the Lowell Regional Transit Authority. And so I don't really have a clear question, except I sort of wanted to piggyback on Susan's question about the outer core. I think we're beyond the outer core. So I'm wondering, when you're, actually this is a question, when you are focusing on your outreach, Victoria, do you focus on all of the MBTA communities? Because the thing that's confusing around here is a lot of our service, a lot of the towns take their cherry sheet assessment that otherwise would have gone to the MBTA, and they give it to their RTA so that they can have some senior vans. And therefore the MBTA doesn't play a role in the local transit, yet we also depend on the trains to go in and out, and people therefore don't have any long distance trip opportunities. Like we envy people. We have ride envy out here. Some people know they can use our local service to get to Concord, get out, wait, get the ride, and go in. But in general, that's a big gap, is the long distance trips. So I'm just wondering, with your outreach, whether you do, and if not, I would want you to encourage you to fully engage those outermost MBTA communities.
Yeah, no, that is a great question. And that's the goal, is to hopefully hit the point where we are engaging our entire service area, including the commuter rail service. So that it doesn't mean that we're going to stop where the orange line has its limits. Just slowly getting there. 3 months down, but many more to go. And so slowly building. But obviously the majority of our service area, at least for rapid transit and bus network, is in the inner core, but then slowly building out. That's kind of the goal. And my goal was to basically start in Boston proper and then build my way out. And so far I've almost made it through the entire city of Boston, and then we have some North Shore communities. So getting there. But to speak to what you were mentioning about the ride, I'm wondering if Jennifer is actually a better resource to talk about that, or we can also at some point invite our colleague to join. Jen, did you want to add anything to that as far as the ride and the service area? Do you know?
I think what you're saying is that folks that live in your area aren't eligible for the ride, correct? but they're like ride adjacent.
They're eligible for the ride, but they have to get to the ride area to use it. And so actually, I think my conclusion, I would hope, is that when you're doing outreach, that you work together with the RTAs and sort of double up your outreach. So it's not just people with disabilities looking to get to the ride, but everybody out here who is transit dependent does not have, has interest in what you do as much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, everybody in Massachusetts is a stakeholder in the ride. I mean, in the MBTA, they're all potential MBTA customers. And what you're saying is like, yeah, the RTAs connect to MBTA service. So don't forget to reach out to those outer areas, correct? Yeah, I'd like to see us work a little closer with RTAs to make sure those connections are kind of seamless and that we're doing outreach and keeping those folks apprised of what we're doing as well.
I know Franny looks happy. I know Franny and I have had a long-standing discussion about how difficult it can be to be on the edges of multiple transit providers. And how we have, in our MPO area, some municipalities that have fixed route transit service from one operator and maybe community or human services or paratransit provided by another, and then you've got commuter rail, and it really can become quite a challenge for folks to navigate. So I just want to point folks to the chat where Judy has posted a couple of additional interesting resources. And then we have a question from Adi, which is, how have you been working with transportation advocacy organizations?
Yeah, so we work closely with them, and that's actually pre-existing to when I joined. We have a policy development working group that is comprised with a lot of the advocacy organizations. They're often our partners, and they bring great ideas on how we can improve things based off of what they're hearing from the community. So folks like Transit Matters and Livable Streets, they're on multiple of our advisory groups, and they're very helpful for reaching out to do focus groups and things like that. So pretty close relationship. I'm still getting to know them because, again, still fairly new, but working there, it's actually Transit Matters is how I got connected to Sandy. So they are a great resource for us.
Yeah. All right. We've got 5 minutes left. Any questions, points, anything folks would like to share?
I would like to thank you and I think it's really exciting, the work you're doing. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
And welcome to your new role, Victoria. It sounds like you started out really strong.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I look forward to hearing from all of you. And if there's suggestions, anything you have, please send them my way. And I'll throw my email in the chat.
We will also be sharing the recording of the meeting, and I will include, I'll send out an email with the link to that and, my contact information and Victoria's contact information. Jennifer, I assume you won't mind if I share yours as well. Of course, anybody can always reach out to me, and I'm happy to put you in touch with other folks who have been at these meetings.
I don't mind at all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Excellent. So you can always reach out later, but given that there don't seem to be any more questions, so if we could go to the next slide, please. Usually I have more events to announce. I do not right now. I happen to be extremely busy with other endeavors, but if you have a coffee chat you'd like us to run, please do reach out to me. I will also be working on scheduling some of our more recurring coffee chats coming up. You can keep your eyes open for more information about the next Transit Working Group quarterly meeting. It's likely to be in August or September. We just had one at the end of May, which was fantastic. And as always, you can reach out to me at johnston@ctps.org or 857-702-3710. Any last questions? All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, especially Victoria, for the presentation. This was a terrific discussion. I thought it was really a blast, and I know I learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing how all of these relationships develop. All right, have a good night, folks. All right, I think we can close it up. Thank you, Stella.